Good day, Suidlanders. How are you? We trust that you're well. The USA has a debt problem, and it is much worse than most people realize. The USA's debt is about $34 trillion, and by the end of March, we know that it'll be roughly $35 trillion. By the way, I am in Ohio, some miles west of the town of Sedan, if you're interested. I know that some people find the phone shaking a bit disconcerting, and I'm sorry about that, but there's not much that I can do. I've set it as stiffly as it allows. Back to the subject. During the course of this year, the USA has raised money by selling bonds. Some of them are called notes, and some of them are called treasuries, and some of them are called bills, and the nicknames vary according to the period of time applicable to the bond. But they're all bonds of differing durations. And very simply, what it is that the USA issues a bond, as other countries do. In fact, as different institutions in the world do. Eskom, for example, has issued bonds in the past to raise money. So you issue a bond and somebody buys it. They buy your promise to pay them back at a certain rate of interest. It's as simple as that. Somebody gives you cash in return for a promise to pay them back more cash. This year, the USA has struggled to sell those bonds. Struggled so much that it has had to force what are known as primary dealers, or the primary dealers, the most senior banks, if you like, in the USA, to buy its unsold bonds. And it's able to do that. There's legal provision for that. The average up until October this year of unsold bonds or unbought bonds was about 11%. Then the average jumped to 13% when a bunch of bonds, much more than usual, couldn't be sold in a big auction of 30-year bonds in October. The average has now gone up. I beg your pardon, not the average. The average has been pushed up. It went from 11 to 13, and it's going up. But in recent sales, the amount of the debt that was not bought by other countries, other institutions, big investment banks in the world, pension funds, people with big money. The average not bought by them, that has had to be bought by the primary dealers, is 19, approaching 20%. Nobody wants to buy American debt because they don't trust the ability of the United States to pay it back. Now, when that happens, when there's a reluctance to buy debt, anybody issuing a bond has to increase the appeal of the bond, and that lies in the interest rate. How much am I going to pay you back? If you buy this note from me, this promise, how much am I going to pay you back? Seeing as you're giving me your money, you're risking your money in my hands. And that has gone up and up and up. They've had to push it up and up and up in order to get people to buy. And as I've already explained, they're still not buying. Certainly not all of it. The USA's budget is $6.1 trillion. The US Treasury's income is $4.44 trillion, meaning that there's a shortfall of about $1.7 trillion. So every year, well, certainly this year, the US government was able to get revenue of $4.44 trillion. But it wanted to spend very much more than that. It wanted to spend $6.1 trillion. Therefore, it had to incur debt to cover the deficit. The deficit in the budget deficit, between what it has in its pocket and what it wanted to spend. $1.7 trillion is the deficit. Now, that's a big problem. It's far too much. This deficit is 38% of the actual budget. In other words, 1.7 is 38%, I beg your pardon, not of the budget, of the income. 1.7 is 38% of 4.44. It's an outlandish shortfall. It's an outlandish excess, spending excess. It's unbelievable. And every indication is that it is going to get worse. And so people are pulling away from US government debt. Now, next year, in the year 2024, the USA is going to have to pay back over $7 trillion of debt. So money that it borrowed in these bonds, money that it borrowed years ago, that by coincidence is all maturing this year. I beg your pardon, in 2024. So of the $34 trillion in US debt, 7.25 trillion will fall due next year, or shall fall due next year, 2024. It's just a coincidence. So how is the USA going to pay that back? Where is it going to find another $7 trillion from? Well, it won't. It's going to have to roll over that debt. It's going to have to refinance that debt. In other words, it's going to have to take $7 trillion in loans to pay its debts, to pay its outstanding loans. There is an enormous economic crisis brewing in the USA. And the powers that be are dealing with it as if it's not all that serious. Nobody is saying, nobody in senior authority is saying this is the end of the world as we know it, which is what they should be saying. I don't think you saw them in the camera. They have these flashing lights. They are something between a stop sign and a robot. So they suspended from 4 lines over the center of a crossing, of an intersection, of a 4-way intersection. Diagonal wires, cables, overhead, suspend them right in the middle, and they flash. And when you get to them, you can either go straight through if there's no traffic, or you have to stop. So they're halfway between a stop sign and a robot. Anyway, back to the topic. And I think we've covered most of it. That's it. The USA is in big financial trouble. Nobody wants to buy its debt, or there are too few takers, and it is using debt, enormous chunks of debt, to finance its budget because it's overspending so phenomenally. And next year is crunch time. Next year, $7 trillion. More than 20% of all of its debt is coming due, and it doesn't have the money to settle those debts. So it's going to have to roll them over, meaning that it's going to have to incur that much debt again, plus interest. And nobody has a clue how that's going to happen. But many of you will be rightly saying, I'm going to end with this. Many of you watching this video will rightly be saying they'll go to war, because they always do. And I'm inclined to agree with you. I don't know for sure that the USA is going to enter some phenomenally big war next year. But if I was a betting man, which I'm not, I would put my money on the US going to war for the same reason that you've just given, because they always do when they're in situations like this.